In these 9 boxes are contained documents, also pieces of evidence, including this drawing from one of the 3 Avery girls who was killed, Karen Avery, who was 7 at the time of her murder.
Doesn't get more horrific than that.
Seemed to be the best kept secret in town. I still think it is, probably maybe in the nation.
Did you consider him a prophet?
Yes.
The Averys didn't believe, not as they ought. And if you would go over the scriptures, if you do not repent, you would be destroyed. And that is in fact what happened.
Today, I want to talk about the Kirtland cult and the murders that they committed, because to me, it's the part that to me is hard to believe about this case is not that the murders happened, but that the cult leader was able to convince these people to do what they did, because I don't know how to say this, but it's like he's very basic. It just, I don't get how he was able to get these followers and then to get them to move to live with him and then to get them to do the things they did. I don't know. Once I looked into his backstory, I kind of felt bad for him. Obviously, nothing justifies what he did, but it's one of those things where it doesn't justify it, but maybe it explains it a little bit. I don't know. In any case, let me just get into the thing because there's so much I want to tell you. So, the whole thing starts on New Year's Eve, 1989, when a man by the name of Keith Johnson, sorry, I struggled with that one, went to the FBI in Kansas City. So Keith tells the FBI, I was part of a cult. And the cult leader, his name is Jeff Lundgren, but we call him Dad. And we all lived together. And 8 months ago, we all participated in a gruesome murders, actually. We basically killed an entire family, the father, the mother, the 3 daughters, the youngest whom was 7. And he says that, I left this cult 8 months ago and, I was afraid, but now I want to come forward. And he drew like a map of where the barn was that the family was buried in. And basically, in the beginning, the FBI, they kind of didn't believe him, but they ended up deciding to send this information over to the FBI in the area because he was in Kansas City and this was in Kirtland, Ohio, this barn with the family. And the family, by the way, they're called the Avery family. The FBI there, they contact the local police, the Kirtland Police Department, and they tell them, this information. And turns out this police department, they already knew about Jeff and his cult, and they had been to the property before. So they took it seriously. They go there and they realize no one is there. And so they end up getting a warrant and they're able to dig in the barn. And once they start digging, immediately they say they didn't even get past a couple inches before this horrible, wretched, rotten smell hit them. It was so bad that they were running out of the barn, barfing, and then going back inside, digging some more and barfing and digging. It was bad. So as they kept digging, all of a sudden the hole began filling with this red water, and they realized that that was blood. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they started to see personal belongings that were buried, like that belonged to children, like kids' drawings and notebooks and stuff like that. So they end up stopping once they hit a human body of an adult male. They call the FBI and it becomes this huge thing. The next day, they had different law enforcement agencies join the excavation because they needed to use better equipment and they had to dig really carefully because they didn't want to disturb the evidence. They end up finding the entire family in that pit, just like Keith Johnson said. And they identified them as Dennis Avery, his wife Cheryl Avery, and their 3 daughters, 15-year-old Trina, 13-year-old Rebecca, and 7-year-old Karen. Based on what Keith Johnson said, that these are the cult members. So it was Jeff Lundgren, the cult leader, his wife Alice, his son Damon, and a bunch of other people. It was like 13 arrest warrants were issued. Right after that, a lot of the members turned themselves into police, hoping that they would get some sort of break by doing that and trying to get like a plea deal and wanting to talk. But there were a few members who were still on the run, two members, and the leader himself, Jeff, his wife Alice, his adult son Damon, and then also some of their Alice and Jeff's younger kids were there too. The cops didn't really know where to look, and if it wasn't for the cult leader making the mistake of calling his mother-in-law, I mean, who knows when they would have found them. What ended up happening was it was all over the news that they were looking for this cult leader, and so Jeff called his mother-in-law and told her to come pick up the younger kids. And he didn't tell her exactly where he was. He just said, I want you to drive towards San Diego. And then when you get to San Diego, call this number. So the mother in law also heard the news about this whole thing and that he was wanted and the murders and all that. So what she ends up doing is calling the cops and telling them what happened. And they take that phone number that Jeff gave her and they trace it to a motel that's just like a couple miles from the border of Mexico, like really, really down south in California. They go there, and all of a sudden, there's like a bunch of FBI agents and cops, and they're all going to this motel. And that's when they see Jeff in a phone booth, like near the lobby of the hotel. They surround the phone booth, they pull Jeff out. One of the officers like puts a gun to his head and it's like, you are under arrest for murder. They go to his motel room, and there they find his wife and his adult son, Damon, as well as the younger kids. After that, when they search the room, they're horrified to find out just how many weapons were there. And they like so many different like rifles and machine guns and pistols, and then ammo, tons of ammo. Then they found a key to a locker, like a storage unit, and they found even more ammo there, more weapons, and just like tons of gunpowder and stuff. So they were like, oh my gosh, thank God we were able to get them the way we did, because if it turned into some sort of like standoff, there would have been so much bloodshed, because it looks like they were not about to go down without a fight. And they were capable. Some of the weapons that Jeff had were the same types of weapons that the FBI agents had. So it just was going to be bad. At this point, there are still two cult members that are at large, Kathy and Danny. They ended up getting arrested a few days after Jeff and his family, when they were also at a motel in San Diego, just a different one. And the housekeeper at that motel was cleaning their room when she found a crazy amount of ammo and guns. And she also found these documents, identification type documents, and she recognized the pictures in these documents as the two people that were still on the run, because again, it was all over the news at the time. So she calls the cops and they end up arresting them. And so now they've got every cult member arrested. What I want to talk about now is how we got here, the whole entire story, because when these people started talking, it was insane. Remember how I told you in the beginning that like when I looked into it, I kind of felt bad for him? Okay, this is why. So Jeff, he grew up in Missouri, Independence, Missouri, and he was part of the RLDS Church. This is like a denomination of the LDS Church, or the Mormon Church, Church of Latter-day Saints, Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But the RLDS is the reorganized Latter-day Saints, Church of whatever. Oh my God, I can't talk today. Can I talk ever? Now, his father was abusive. Okay. His father was, everyone says this, Jeff and the neighbors, people who knew him when he was growing up, they said that basically his father was kind of like, he was a dick. He would belittle Jeff, humiliate him in front of people. And then also his punishments were really severe for little small infractions that like every kid would do. And this was a relentless thing that his father did all the time. And so people kind of felt sorry for Jeff growing up. Then Jeff also kind of became a loner. But this is where it's interesting. He wasn't like a loner and had low self-esteem. at least not on the face of it. Everyone said he was an arrogant loner. It's kind of like the way he dealt with his father belittling him is to have like delusions of grandeur to like pump himself up, kind of. But then it started to get disturbing because neighbors also said that he was um, basically torturing animals, right? Which is like the number one serial killer red flag. One neighbor said that he witnessed Jeff, when he was young, capture this little rabbit, nail it to a piece of wood, and just like beat it to death. And so everyone was like, okay, stay away from this guy. And Jeff was like, I don't even want to hang out with you guys anyway, so whatever. And then when Jeff was a teenager, he became really close with his dad. When his dad decided that he was going to teach him things about hunting and firearms and like survival. And so they would spend a lot of time together in the woods. And by the time that Jeff graduated high school, he was like an expert survivalist. Like he knew all the things to be able to survive in the wild, really good with guns and hunting and that kind of stuff. So he graduates high school and he decides to go to college. He goes to this college in Missouri and he majors in electrical something, electricals, electricians, electronics. Electronics is the word. When Jeff goes to college, he doesn't live on campus in the dorms. Instead, he goes to this youth house for RLDS church members. And it's at this youth house that he meets Alice Keeler, his future wife. Now, Alice also grew up in the RLDS. Obviously, that's why she was in the youth home. And guess what? She was also abused by her father. Her father was fine for the longest time, but then he got sick. He had MS, multiple sclerosis. No, I really can't talk. I mean, I never could, but especially today. He had MS, and this caused him to stay at home all the time and take all these medications. And then he became angry. And basically, he would take out his frustrations on his daughter, Alice, and his other kids and beat them and yell at them and stuff like that. So when Jeff and Alice meet, they hit it off right away because they can relate and they become really, really close. There's also another guy who went to the same college and lived in the same youth house as them, who was also obviously part of the RLDS. And that is, guess who? Keith Johnson. Remember the guy in the beginning that I told you told the FBI about these murders? Yeah, he went to college with them too. So they all become really close, but Jeff and Alice in particular are extremely close. It develops into a romantic relationship, and Alice gets pregnant. They decide to drop out of college. Now, this really upset her parents. They were so mad that they did not attend her wedding because after he got her pregnant, they got married. And so she was on her own and pregnant. And so now Jeff decides, well, I need to get a job to support her. So he decides to join the Navy. This was in 1970. Remember the Vietnam War. So he ends up serving in the Vietnam War in the Navy, doing like electrical things. I'm sure there's a term for that. Hold on. What do they call it? I seem to not understand anything about any electrical things. Electronics technician. He was an electronics technician in the Navy. In the Navy. So Alice then gives birth to their son Damon. When this happens, Jeff wants to leave the military. Like he asks for early release and he says that his family need his presence and they can't survive without him being there. And the military, they're like, no, we don't agree. Like everyone else has a family too that they're away from. Like, no, you don't get to leave early. And so it wasn't until 1974 when Jeff was honorably discharged. When he gets discharged, he comes home and Alice gets pregnant right away. He has a very hard time holding down a job. Whatever money he makes, he's spending irresponsibly. On top of that, he's cheating on Alice. And then the reason why he couldn't hold down a job is because he kept stealing from his job. Like every employer that he had, pretty much he stole from them. And so what would happen is that he would get fired. he would get mad, he would come home, he would beat his wife, he would then spend the money that he made or stole on shit that the family doesn't need, stuff just for him, irresponsible stuff, cheat, and rinse and repeat. Making matters worse was that he kept getting Alice pregnant. So they had like 4 kids. It got so bad at one point that Alice had to get hospitalized because he pushed her down the stairs and she ruptured her spleen. Even though Jeff was cheating, stealing, beating his wife, and all of that, he considered himself a devout Christian. And he starts to develop, okay, his own way of interpreting the scripture. This is the Book of Mormon. It's called chiasmus. Chiasmus. This chiasmus um, method of interpretation is this old Hebrew way of interpreting like ancient poetry, but of course, Jeff said he invented it, of course, right? For example, one sentence says that you look for a lion and he came as a lamb. Now we look for a lamb, but he will come as a lion. And so this repetition meant that it was a true statement or the sentence in between that was true. And if it wasn't mirrored like that, it was a lie. And so this allowed him to really come up with crazy interpretations of the scripture that really he would end up using that to do some crazy shit.
But the fact is that the Lord speaks very harshly upon those who will not hear his voice. It was constrained by the Spirit, and it was undeniable that it was time to begin to clean house. And it says in the Scriptures, both in the New Testament, the Old Testament, upon your house it will begin. Judgment will begin upon your house. And within my house it began.
He was also upset with the RLDS church because he felt like it was too liberal, that it was giving women too many rights. They allowed women to obtain the priesthood in the Mormon church, which was like not typical of other denominations of Mormonism. I don't know why I said that weird. This ends up with him having his own study sessions at home where he teaches this interpretive method.
We had different classes. These classes were basically to reestablish and reaffirm very strongly in our minds that there was such a thing as a pattern and that the pattern was true. But the basic precept was that if you use the pattern, you can't err. You absolutely cannot flaw in that.
People, for some reason, believe him, okay, to the point where they're donating money to him. They're like, wow, he is the truth. He is the way. He needs support. And so he immediately is like, oh, wait a minute, I can make money from this. You know how he doesn't like to work, he likes to steal. This is the beginning of his cult. So now he has this small group of believers or followers, whatever you want to call it. And they are donating to him, but he starts to get greedy. He's like, this is not enough money. I need more and I need it now. Remember, he's in Missouri now. He tells them that he interpreted the scripture and it is telling him that he needs to go to Kirtland, Ohio. And the reason why he said Ohio is because he said it was mirrored like OHIO, like the 2 O's at the end. I don't know, it was mirrored, whatever. He said that, but also there's this place, Kirtland, Ohio, that already has like a lot of Mormon history and temples there and stuff. He knew that there would be a pool there of people that he could recruit essentially to his group cult, whatever you want to call it. He and his wife and kids, they go to Ohio. When he gets there, he goes to the Kirtland Temple, okay, the Mormon temple there. And when he goes there, they offer him a job basically as a tour guide. And the compensation is very little. It's like $500 a month, but they give him free room and board. So he was like, perfect. So he's giving tours there. And when he gives these tours, he's telling the people about this method, where the mirror thing, the chiasmus or whatever the hell. So he tells them that, and some of them were like, "Oh my God, what? That like cool, I love it." He's already building a new following in Ohio, but also, what is he doing? He's stealing, of course. He's taking donations that he gets in the tour, as well as money that he sees coming in from other areas. And he ends up stealing, they say, between $25,000 to $40,000. It's a big range, but that's what I found like repeatedly. The church eventually notices at the end of the year when they're like, where the hell is the money? They couldn't even cover some of their basic costs because it was such a drastic decline in their income. And they look into it and they find out that Jeff is stealing. So they tell him, get out. He's fired and leave now. So he ends up getting this farm with the money that he has, but he tries to convince, and he does, he doesn't just try to, he convinces the people that he was talking to during this tour that he was having come to his place when he still worked at the temple and teaching them this method. He tells them, listen, I'm leaving. I'm going to have this farm. Come live with me and I will take care of you. And so they do that. And as part of them living with him, they give him their money that they make. And so now he's got income coming from his followers. During this time, he also starts contacting the followers that he had in Missouri and telling them, hey, I have this farm in Ohio. I've got people here who live with me who are following the truth and the way and his interpretations. Like, sell your house, come here, give me the money. You can live with me. I'll take care of everything and we can all be a happy family. And so they did that actually. And every night he would have these classes where he would teach them the interpretations. There was one family, the Avery family. They are the ones that end up getting murdered. They knew Jeff and Alice from Missouri. Now, Jeff always talks shit about Dennis Avery all the time because Dennis's wife, Cheryl, would, have an opinion, God forbid. And to him, this was just a sin. And he found Dennis to be weak because he allowed his wife to have an opinion. Can you believe this shit? And so he would basically talk shit about them. When Jeff called the Avery family and told Dennis, hey, sell your house in Missouri and come down here with me. And then Dennis did that. Alice was surprised because she's like telling Jeff, why would you tell the Avery family to come join us? Like, don't you hate them? And Jeff is like, I want their money. And Alice is like, oh, okay, I get it. When the Avery family did sell their home in Missouri and come to Ohio, they actually did not give them all the money. What ended up happening was this. They sold the family for, sold the family? Oh, geez. They sold the home in Missouri for $19,000. This is in the 80s, but that seems very, very affordable. Anyway, so they sell this home, and instead of living with Jeff and giving him all the money, Dennis Avery gives Jeff $10,000, so more than half, but he gets his own little home and keeps the $9,000 for himself and his family. This upset Jeff. He felt like Dennis was slighting him. So now we come to a new phase in the manipulation. Jeff starts convincing his followers that he could basically like read their minds and that he's not just Jeff Lundgren, he is a prophet. Okay. And so the way that he convinced them that he could read their minds is that he would eavesdrop on them and basically spy on them in his home and then say things to them later about the things he overheard that made them think that he could read their mind. Okay, I don't know. It worked. And then he started to create like rules and they kept getting stricter and stricter. He banned them from talking to each other and he would call it murmuring. So they could only speak to him, but not to each other, which is weird. Then it became sexual, right? Which always happens. And this is when he tried to like humiliate the men and degrade the women and get them to express their loyalty to him. He had this thing like a dancing ceremony where he had the women get naked and dance, and then he quote cleansed them with his seed. And then this article that I found, it literally said that he would send them back to their husbands with quote soiled underwear to humiliate the husbands, and then he would have the husbands who were dressed in like full military fatigues take an oath of loyalty to him, which, by the way, he also made the women do when they were dancing naked. They would take an oath of loyalty to him. I don't know why. I don't know why they did it. Honestly, I don't. But they did. They did. After this, though, there was a member who couldn't handle it. His name was Kevin Curry. He was like, you know what? I'm out. This is too much for me. Can't do it. He leaves, basically escapes. Word started to spread in the area about this cult and what they were doing. And it gets back to the Kirtland temple where he got fired from, right? And they find out what he's doing and they end up excommunicating him from the church in 1987. And this is when Jeff gets upset. So he starts ramping it up. He tells them that he had a vision that the second coming of Christ was near and that he got two specific dates. And he tells them these dates. And so this kind of renews their motivations to stay because the whole time he's promising them, that they're going to see God and witness the second coming and be part of it and go to heaven and blah blah blah. The dates, they come and they go and nothing happens. Yikes. What do you do now? So that's when he says, I misinterpreted my vision. My vision actually stated that we have to take over the temple, the Kirtland temple where he got fired. Yeah, they have to take that over and they have to sacrifice the officials of that church because Jesus is mad that they been making these changes and letting women become priests and all this awful stuff. So Jesus wants us to go kill them, take it over, and then he's going to come back. Sorry, I misinterpreted that. Then he says, oh, by the way, we have to do this by a very specific date. And that date, can you guess what the date is? Well, it's May 3rd, but can you guess the significance of May 3rd? It's his birthday. Yeah, they had to do it by his birthday because remember, he's a prophet. He's also a Taurus. So remember that guy, Kevin Curry, the cult member that I told you left and couldn't take it? Well, he comes back. He does. I don't know why, but he came back. Now Jeff is like really feeling good. He's like, this guy came back and he's telling them we need to take over this temple. He starts creating almost like these training camps for his cult members to train for this attack on the Kirtland temple. Now it's February 1988, just a few months before their planned attack. Kevin Curry, the guy who left and came back, he leaves again, this time for good. And when he leaves, he goes to the authorities and he tells them about this planned attack on the temple. This is when Jeff gets on the local authorities' radar. They start spying on him, essentially looking into his past. This is where they find out about him stealing from this temple, how he got fired from there, and that he has these people living with him and that they're basically a cult, right? And they decide to confront him about this attack. They call him into the police station and they tell him, listen, we've been watching you. We've been getting word that you're going to do this attack. You better not do this attack. So Jeff goes back to his followers and he tells them that he's calling off the attack. He goes, wait a minute, I got a vision. Like, it's not the temple we need to attack, it's the Avery family. The Avery family, they didn't live there. So they were not as quote unquote obedient to Jeff because they were a little bit detached. So when he would have these nightly scripture lessons, Dennis Avery would question him sometimes, which was a big no-no. And not only that, but he kind of was defiant in the sense that he didn't live with him and he wasn't giving him all the money, which already pissed Jeff off. And now he was starting to question his interpretations. And so he makes them the enemy. He starts having these meetings without the Avery family and telling the other followers that basically they're sinners, that all the problems that this group goes through, somehow he connects it back to Dennis Avery and his family. And he says the wife is so unruly and disobedient, and the kids, she's not even rearing them correctly. Look at them running and laughing. We have to kill them all. And after we kill them, we're going to go into the wilderness And that's when we're going to see God. He manages to convince the group to kill the Avery family, that they're essentially a sacrifice to usher in the second coming. And somehow they agree. I don't know. I don't know. They say they were afraid, but debatable. Anyway, I mean, not that they're not afraid, but like some of the members were able to leave. So I don't feel like it was impossible to leave. For whatever reason, they wanted to stay and they said, okay, we're going to do this. So now he starts stockpiling even more weapons and ammo. He's constantly walking around in military fatigues with a loaded pistol and trying to instill fear in the group. Alice and Jeff, they go to the Avery's home and they start basically like casing the joint in terms of like looking at their belongings and deciding the things that they were going to take after they kill them. Just nasty. Then they tell the Avery family, we're going to go on this trip to the wilderness and we need you to like pack up and take all your stuff, bring it over to the farm because we're going to go on this camping trip. And then Jeff tells Cheryl, Dennis Avery's wife, to write a letter to her parents in Wyoming and tell them, sorry, he tells her to write a letter to her parents and tell them that she is going to Wyoming because Dennis got a job and they need to move to Wyoming right away, and that basically don't expect to hear from us anytime soon. So he's already setting it up. Also, it's around this time that remember Keith Johnson, the guy that he met when he was in college, who's the one who ends up telling police about these murders. He calls him up and tells him, hey, like I have this group and we're doing this, come join. Because remember, he lost a couple followers. So Keith and his wife, Kathy, decide to sell their home in Missouri, come and live with Jeff in Ohio as part of this whole thing. Okay. This would end up being the biggest mistake they could have made. A few months after Keith and his wife Kathy joined the group is when the murders take place. Now it's a week before the murders. Jeff tells Keith, the new guy, the guy who's going to snitch on him, and another guy called Ron to start digging this huge pit in the barn. This is where the Avery family would end up being buried. It's the big day, April 17th, 1989. Dennis and Cheryl come with all their things to the farm and they end up having this dinner at 6:30 p.m., like the Last Supper. Okay. Everyone other than the Avery family knew what was going to happen, that they were about to sacrifice this entire family. And that's when Jeff tells all the men, other than Dennis, to come to his bedroom. Then they're all sitting there together. He pulls out his pistol and he tells them all, are you in? And one by one, they all say, yes, they're in. Yes, they're in. They're in. Like, let's kill this family. And so they start coming up with the protocol, which basically is that they're all going to go to the barn. Ron is going to go and get the family one by one, starting with Dennis, then his wife, then the kids in order of age. Lastly, they're going to get the youngest one and they're going to bring them into the barn, tie them up, throw them in the pit, and Jeff is going to shoot them. So part of the plan was that Jeff's wife, Alice, would leave before any of this happened. So she was out shopping while this was all going down. The women were in the home to distract the family so that Ron could bring them out one by one. Greg, his job was to stand outside of the barn and rev the chainsaw at the time that Jeff would start shooting so that people wouldn't hear. Jeff looks at Ron and he says, let's do it. And they go. All the men go into the barn. Ron goes to the house and he tells Dennis Avery, hey, can you come with me to the barn? I need to gather some items and prepare them for this camping trip. So Dennis is like, okay. He comes in to the barn with Ron. And as soon as he comes in there, Ron pulls out a stun gun and he like zaps Dennis with it, but the voltage is too low to actually like immobilize him, but it hurts. So Dennis starts screaming and he says, no, no, this isn't necessary. Please, this isn't necessary. God damn it. God damn it. God damn it. And that's when all the men run towards, except for Jeff, run towards Dennis and they start like subduing him and tying him up. They carry him and they put him into the pit. His hands and feet are bound and he has duct tape across his mouth, but his eyes are not covered. And he sees that Jeff is standing there over him on a pile of dirt and pulls out his gun. Greg revs the chainsaw. Jeff shoots him twice. After he shoots Dennis, Jeff calls all the men to where the pit is and he makes them look down. He tells them, "You'd better see what this looks like." All the men look. They don't really say anything except for his son, Damon. He starts crying hysterically, screaming, crying, everything like that, to the point where they decided that they couldn't let him be involved in like subduing the members of the Avery family and putting them in the pit anymore. They said he should just be the lookout because he was so hysterical. After that, Ron leaves the barn, goes to the house, tells Cheryl, "Hey, we need you in the barn. Dennis needs your help with something." She's like, "Okay." She gets into the barn. Again, Ron tries to zap her with a stun gun. Same thing. It doesn't really immobilize her. And she's freaking out. And that's when he puts his hand on her shoulder and he says, "Just give it up. It'll be easier this way. Just let go." And they say that Cheryl just completely submitted, didn't move, let them tie her up, put her in the pit. She sees Dennis, her husband, is dead next to her in the pit, and Jeff shoots her three times, twice in the chest and one in the stomach. She falls, dies. Of course, during this time, Greg revved the chainsaw, and after that, again, Ron goes back to the house and he gets the eldest daughter. She's 15 years old. Her name is Trina. And he tells her, "We need you in the barn." And she's like, "Okay." So he brings her into the barn and they say that it was similar to Cheryl, where she was kind of confused at first, but when she realized what was happening, she didn't fight back. She just stood completely still. They tie her up, they throw her in the pit, and she sees both of her parents are dead. Jeff again shoots her several times. He tried to shoot her once in the head, but it grazed her head and she kind of screamed. And then he shot her again. And although she wasn't dead, she was like writhing in pain and making these sounds. They never fired like a mercy shot. They let her sit there and struggle, which is awful. It was time for the next kid. Again, Ron goes, and there's two little kids, a 13-year-old Becky and 7-year-old Karen. And he's like, "Who wants to ride a horse?" And they're both like, "We want to go. Well, we want to go." So he's like, "Well, I'll take Becky first. She's older." So he like puts her on his back, like piggyback, takes her into the barn. All the men there, besides Jeff and his son Damon, they tie her up, but they make it seem like it's a game. Like, "Oh, we're playing a game, tie her up, throw her in the pit." At that point, she sees her dead family. She gets shot twice too. And now it's time for the youngest one. At this point, she's in there and she's crying, "I want my mommy, I want my mommy." The women that are there distracting are like, "You'll see her soon." Then Ron shows up, puts her on the piggyback as well, takes her into the barn. They all do the playing the game of tying you up, put this little 7-year-old girl in the pit, shoots her. Jeff shoots her and she dies instantly. Then he says to the other members, like, "Pour lime and cover this with dirt." And they do that. Then after that, he's like, "Time for my scripture class." And so they say that like no one was talking. They were all like sad and quiet. And at the end of the session, he asks them, "Okay, is there anything that you guys have to say about what happened tonight?" And that's when Keith says, "No one should have to die that way." And Jeff's response was, "It had to be done. It was God's will." So now it's the day after, and they're preparing to leave to go to the wilderness to see God. And all of a sudden, a bunch of cops and FBI agents show up and they're freaking out. They think that they know what happened. Turns out they don't. They're still trying to figure out like if they're going to do the attack in May, and they're coming to ask the cult members, "Are you here willingly? Do you know anything about this attack on the temple?" They had no idea that they had just murdered the Avery family. And so all the cult members are like, "Yes, we're here willingly. No, we've never heard of an attack. We don't understand what you're talking about." And so they end up leaving, nothing happens, but they're freaked out. They think that they're onto them or something. And so in the middle of the night, they all leave. They end up going to West Virginia and set up camp like in the wilderness. And it's in West Virginia where shit gets even crazier because Jeff is now almost on this high, right? He feels like he's got more control. He just got away with murder and he starts making them even more submissive towards him. And he decides not only is he going to cleanse the women with his seed in front of their husbands, but he's actually going to take them as his wives. So they don't go back to their husbands after that. They're his wife. He takes Kathy as his second wife. Keith, that's his wife. And this was the last straw for Keith. Not murdering an entire family, including kids, right? That wasn't the last straw for him. It was Jeff taking his wife that sent him over the edge. This is when he decides to leave. He basically escapes. And at first, though, he doesn't go to police. He wouldn't go to police for months. He was more concerned with making sure he didn't get caught. So he goes to Buffalo, New York, and he's just hiding. So at this point, the group is also running out of money and they can't stay in the woods in West Virginia anymore. So Kathy, Jeff's new second wife, she had a friend in Missouri who had a farm, and this friend was willing to let Jeff and the cult live there. So they decide, okay, let's go there. They go there for the winter. But again, they realize that they need money. Like they have a home, but they still need money. So Jeff tells the group, listen, we're going to separate. He tells all the men to get jobs, save that money, and then they're all going to get back together in the spring. And guess what? Guess what's going to happen in spring? They're going to see God, because you know what didn't happen in the wilderness that he told them would happen was that the Jesus was going to come back. It's going to be the end of the world. That never happened. It's been a while now, and that's not been happening. So at this point, when he tells them we're all going to separate and tells the men to get jobs, they all see this as their break, right? To get away from him, because they don't believe him anymore. They're like, this is bullshit. It is at this point when Jeff realizes they're not coming back because he can't reach them and they're not reaching out to him or anything. And so he freaks out. He's like, okay, not only did they abandon me, but I'm pretty sure they're now going to go to the cops and tell them what happened. So he freaks out. He goes with his wife, his son Damon, the other kids that they have, as well as those two other members that I told you about, Danny and his second wife, Kathy, and they all go to California, San Diego, and that's where they're hiding. Keep in mind that at this point, Kathy, right, the new wife, second wife, whatever, she's pregnant too. So it's a hot mess. And now it's been 8 months since the murder. Okay. It's New Year's Eve, 1989, and Keith goes to the FBI. That's when he tells them, I was part of a cult. This guy stole my wife and we murdered a family. That is the backstory. Now, let me tell you what happened with all the members. Almost all the members took plea deals except for Jeff, his wife Alice, his son Damon, and Ron Luff. If you'll remember, he's the one who walked each of the family members from the house to the barn. First was Alice's trial, and her defense was that she was abused by Jeff and really couldn't leave and had no choice and didn't want to take part in this. And, you know, they presented all that evidence, but the jury took one day to come back with guilty on all counts, which she was charged with complicity to commit aggravated murder, which means that she got like 100 something years and she wouldn't be eligible for parole until after she did 100 years. So basically, she got life. Then it was time for Jeff's trial. Okay, everyone thought he was going to plead insanity. He actually didn't. And it was really weird because his defense, they never called any witnesses. They didn't call Jeff, any experts, anything. They basically just said he was confused. He really did think he was a prophet. He really did think he was helping. And that was the defense. And it was crazy because the jury, it only took them 2 hours to come back with guilty on all counts. And when it was time for the sentencing, Jeff sat there and spoke for 5 hours. They had to listen listening to him go on for 5 hours, and it took them 2 hours to be like, put him to death, we're done. So that was his sentence. And then it was time for his son Damon's trial. And Damon, his defense was similar to his mom's, where it was like, I was abused by him. I didn't have a choice. Like, I was an unwilling participant. I was forced. But they were able to kind of, the prosecution showed different instances where maybe he could have ran away or whatever, and he didn't, and that he was benefiting and participating. And in the end, he ends up getting guilty on all counts except for Cheryl's murder. He didn't get charged because it happened right after he had the breakdown. And I guess the jury felt like, since he had the breakdown and he was hysterical, he didn't really participate in Cheryl's, but they did charge him with the kids' murders. And he ends up also getting, like, pretty much a life sentence. And then it was Ron Luff's trial. Remember, he's the guy who walked them from the house to the barn. He also gets like 150 plus years. And as for the other members, got sentences where it was like 20 to 50, something like that, years, but they all had the possibility of parole in 2010. Jeff was supposed to be executed because he was sentenced to death. Well, he ends up joining this lawsuit where he basically claims he's too obese to be executed. The injections that he would have to take wouldn't kill him fast enough. And so it was considered cruel and unusual punishment. And so he tried to get out of it like that, and it didn't work. And so they ended up killing him with the lethal injection in 2006. And then when he found out, like several hours before he was supposed to be put to death, that it wasn't going to work and he was going to be put to death, he called his second wife, Kathy, on the phone and cried. Okay. Oh, fuck him. Last meal, if you're curious, I don't know. I think these things are kind of interesting. He asked for turkey, white meat only, mashed potatoes and gravy, yeast rolls, salad with tomatoes and radishes with wishbone French dressing, Pepsi, and pumpkin pie with whipped cream for dessert. And then in 2010, a bunch of these cult members got released. Okay. And so that's basically where it stands. I would love to know what you guys think about this thing. Like, do you understand how he was able to get them to do that? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was the mind reading thing, but like, I don't know. I don't want to say that they're stupid, but they're not that smart. I'll just say that. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.